Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of Basics of Astrology, Part 2. And today we're going to be talking about some of the chart aspects as well as the concept of retrograding. Somebody asked me the other day, hey Niwa, why are we starting with like planets and aspects before we've even talked about the signs and the houses? As you know, some of these aspects, these are just the basic ones that we're going to be going over, and there's going to be a lot of really big powerful ones later on. I don't understand why you're not making them all in a cohesive sense instead of all spread out like this. Well, before we jump into this, one of the reasons that we're doing it in this fashion is because I feel like episode 1 and 2, or parts 1 and 2, mainly deal with math and sciences, right? Episode 1 was about the planets, and I think many people can easily relate to it because, it does deal with the planets, things that we've all learned through elementary school. And even when we talk about today the chart aspects, we're going to be talking a lot about math, especially things like degree, geometry, which is actually one of the very more important parts about spirituality, because in spirituality we talk about sacred geometry. So that's kind of one of my like tidbits before we jump in as to why we're doing things in the order that we're doing it. It's not because Niwa just wants to throw out the first thing out there and try to confuse the heck out of you. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm trying to make sure that you guys can kind of jump into it without having to know a lot of the like background information at first, so that I feel things will make a lot more sense for you guys. So with that said, hey, let's turn on the camp, and how's it going, y'all? So again, today we're going to be going over the basics of astrology part 2, chart aspects and retrograding. And so I guess the first thing I need to ask you all, do you know what an aspect is, right? Because this is a term that we throw around quite frequently, and now Neil's dying of coughing because he's, choking on saliva. This is a word that we throw around often, but I'm not entirely sure that you guys know exactly what it is that I'm talking about when I refer to an aspect. Essentially, here's the long-winded version. In astrology, an aspect is the angle that is created by 2 points in an astrological interest on a chart. Aspects are measured by angular distances in degrees and minutes to elliptic longitude, blah, 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 blah. So basically, what does it mean? It's an aspect is a measurable degree that is created by 2 points of interest. All right. So if we grab our little circle up here, woohoo, let's say that this is Mercury, right? Mercury is right here and Venus is over here. These two make an aspect. Yay, I'm an aspect. Woohoo, right? Now, obviously, it's going to talk about things like degrees and minutes, and those are all very important, especially as we talk about astrology later on. But the most run-down, basic definition of what is an aspect, it's basically, a measurable angle between 2 points. That's it. That's literally the simplest way to describe an aspect. So, now that we know what's an aspect, what type of aspects are we talking about? Like, what exists, right? Well, in this part, we're going to be going over some of the most basic ones. So we're going to talk about harmonious aspects, we're going to be talking about challenging aspects, and we're going to be talking about conjuncting aspects. Those are going to be everything that we're going to be going over. And it's a little bit run down compared to some of the stuff that I've been lately talking about in the videos, especially when we go into grand trines, grand squares, T-squares, mystic rectangles, right? It really gets into deeper into sacred geometry and all that. But for now, we're just going to go over the most basic stuff so that you guys understand what aspects are. So without further ado, let's jump into harmonious aspects. 2 of the most harmonious aspects that we generally always talk about are trines and sextiles. Alright, so to begin with up here, a trine is essentially a 120 degree angle, which you can have about 5 to 10 degrees of like how do I say this? Not necessarily a degree of error, but like you can stretch it out about that far. So it can go somewhere from like 110 to 130, right? You have kind of like that 10-degree discrepancy that you're allowed. But generally, you're counting at 120 and 5 to 10 degrees in either side. Planets in trines support each other's, right? So trines by natures are accepting energies. When one planet, as you can see from the illustration on the bottom right here, when one either point or planet is trining another planet or point, they are generally accepting of each other. They work in unison, right? So the talents that trines offer a native are so natural that it's almost unconscious. It's a very beneficial aspect, extremely beneficial. When you're talking about things like, let's say that we have let's say this was Mercury and then we had Saturn down here. It would essentially mean that the two of them are working hand to hand without any problems, almost flawlessly, to the point that you barely even notice that their energies are having a massive beneficial influence on you. This is why it's so important to talk about astrology, because there are influences every single day that are occurring and you're not even aware of them, right? All right, so the big blue lines that are 120 degrees are known as trines. They're very beneficial and they're so natural and accepting of one another that they're almost unconscious buffs. They're kind of what you can call a passive buff, right? This is a passive buff, whereas this is an active buff. So sextiles, which are generally about 60 degrees, given roughly about 4 degrees of error, would be like the little ones up here, right? All right, so sextiles, like trines, have some points and ease. Generally, that means that they're still very much beneficial. However, sextiles have a little bit more oomph to them, all right? So, and I've mentioned this before in some of the most recent weekly astrological forecasts that I've been talking about. When it comes to sextiles, these are active actions. These are active buffs. Whereas a trine, you kind of just walk into a room and you receive a beneficial a buff just for being in the presence of the energy, and you're like, whoa, that's kind of cool. For a sextile, you actively need to turn on your spell so that you receive the benefits that these two planets are trying to work towards, right? So these are talents that people appreciate the most because you have to work for them. They may be more inclined to notice and work on these talents. These aspects require effort to gain their benefits. So definitely trines are more like passive buffs and sextiles are more like active buffs. A lot of people will also say that sextile buffs are not as powerful or as potent as trines are. And even though that may have a bit of truth in it, I still think that sextiles are even much more important than trine, in the sense that you need to actively and consciously go for these buffs, as opposed to trines, which they just naturally occur. So that's the difference between these two harmonious aspects. Let's take a look at some challenging aspects, shall we? Now, we've been talking about a couple of these as well on the weekly astrological forecast, which are squares and oppositions. And as you can see, the squares are a little bit shorter. They're about 90 degrees or so, and the oppositions are a 180 degree, right? So let's begin with the square, which is, again, has a margin of error of 5 to 10 degrees. So it's fine. It's about the same as a trine. Squares create tension between the planets and points involved. Tension, however, is necessary in order to stimulate you to take action, but too much tension can translate into stress. This aspect focuses us to grow and learn from our lessons. Now, I've definitely spoken a lot about these in regards recently when we were talking about Jupiter squaring the nodes, right? Jupiter squaring the nodes is essentially Jupiter kind of showing our soul what it is that we need to let go and what we need to attain in our lives. It's literally these are your new beliefs. You need to break away from the old beliefs so that you can acquire these new set of beliefs. And in that case, Jupiter is being put through quite a bit of tension in order to stimulate you to take action, right? But of course, too much tension can lead to stress. However, in most cases, these are very challenging aspects that one needs to learn how to overcome so that they may benefit from the buffs that these challenging aspects may present with us or to us. Now, oppositions are a little bit different. And the reason I say that oppositions are a little bit different is because look at oppositions, right? Opposition is basically two different opposing forces. In this case, let's say that you have Aries and Libra, right? And I know that we haven't gotten to signs yet, so this is a little bit of ahead of a script here. But Aries is kind of really all about the self. It cares about itself, whereas Libra cares about others. So there's already a big difference between the two signs. One that looks inward and one that looks outward, right? So when we're talking about an opposition, it's essentially oppositions are said to be the second most powerful aspect and single most stressful aspect because you're dealing with two oppositions, right? The opposition causes wow, a bit of a typo there. Essentially, it creates an exaggeration as they are not unified, right? So one planet on one side is going to be taking on the qualities of one sign, whereas one point on the other side is going to be taking on the qualities of the other sign. So if the moon only cares about itself, that's our emotions, and Mars only cares about helping others, our actions and our emotions are not going to align. They're not going to work together. Quite contrary to that, they're going to be fighting against each other. Your emotions want to focus on you, but your actions has to be about others. You see how that goes? So it's a very different it causes a massive exaggeration, and in fact it is the single most stressful aspect because you have two polar differences in expressions. So, they need to learn about themselves through interactions with others as they come to understand the two polar opposite ideals. So definitely two polar opposite ideals is the thing that you really want to look at here. And it can be extremely challenging. It is extremely stressful. And learning how to deal with this aspect is one of the major challenges as the moon goes around the chart every 28 days. And in fact, if you're watching this as it's coming out alongside some of my other weekly astrological forecasts, you'll see that we have not one opposition but two opposition making a grand square. So imagine this on its biggest, you're basically exacerbating the amount of stress that is involved. You have essentially 4 squares and 2 oppositions making a grand square. That's how stressful grand squares are, and we're going to be experiencing that on the Wednesday coming up soon. But let me not talk about that. We're just talking about challenging aspects right now. And yeah, squares creates tension, can create stress, but we don't want it to reach that level. Whereas oppositions will create a ton of stress as you overcome some of your biggest hurdles, right? So what else do we got, right? We've talked about harmonious aspects. We've talked about challenging aspects. Let's talk about the and conjunctions, right? There are 2 types here, right? So the first one is a regular conjunction, and let's see if I don't completely mess this up. If you look at where the shadow is now, you'll see two dots together. When two planets are said to be this close, you can essentially say that they're conjunct together. Let's see, can we realign it? One more. Hey, we back. Alright, cool. So, a conjunction is an angle of approximately 0 to 8 degrees. This is said to be one of the most powerful aspects, intensifying the effects of the involved planets mutually and being a major point in the chart. A conjunction are energies that are unified or united. They are blended and therefore they act as one. Okay. This is very big. Because essentially what you have here is that when planets are very close together, like say for example Uranus and Athena here on the chart, these two planets are acting as one planet and they're charging their energies together, right? They are charging their energies together. And again, down here, we've had Ceres and North Node conjunct for quite some time now. They are uniting their energies in which this is your life goal and this is your rite of passage. In order for you to reach your life goal, you need to go through the rite of passage. And these two energies are closely working together. So they act as one big focal point, and instead of having one bit of energy in that sign, you're going to double that energy. They make that point, that sign or that house much more powerful. And in the future, I'm going to want to talk about stelliums. We're not quite there yet, but it's essentially when you have 3 points or more conjunct, you have a stellium. Which rivals the strength of a sun, moon, or ascendant. So as you can see, they're pretty powerful. But again, we're not there yet. We'll talk about that next time. Inconjunctions, right? Sometimes they're known as quincunx. I can't always pronounce this word properly, so I prefer to go with inconjunction instead. But essentially, it's that green line that I've always talked about, right? Inconjuncts are usually 6 signs away. So if we count Libra, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there's our Chiron, right? So 6 houses away is usually the way that I remember how to tell if something is inconjunct or not. However, we're looking at it from a mathematical standpoint. They're about 150 degrees away, given a 3 orb difference. Not 5, not 8, not 10, but only 3. If it's 4, it's very weak. It's susceptible, but it's very weak. The lowest that I would go is 0 to 3. No more than that. So the points involved in a inconjunction, whoops, that just slid over to the side. The points involved in an inconjunction don't really understand each other. The signs are not only different, but they also have different elements and they have different modalities. Yeah, that's a bit of a typo there. Not the signs are not only yeah. The signs are not only different, but the modalities and the elements as well. So what I'm talking about is, okay, we have Mars in Libra, correct? Libra is an air sign. We also have Chiron in Pisces, right? So this is a water sign. Now, when we're also talking about modalities, which we haven't gotten to that because we're actually going to talk about that on the third video or part 3, modalities are a type of description that signs generally have. You will either have a cardinal sign, a fixed sign, or a mutable sign. Inconjuncts generally are also different elements but different modalities as well. So Libra is a cardinal sign, right? But Pisces is a mutable sign. And right now you don't need to know exactly what those words mean because I will explain it later on. But just know that when inconjuncts do this, they talk about different signs. This is a lot different than, say, this, for example, because both Libra and Aries are cardinal signs, and both Libra and Capricorn are also cardinal signs. And we talk about harmonious aspects here. We have, they are kind of a bit of a different sign as well, right? We have Aries as a cardinal, and then we have Leo as a fixed, or Aries as a cardinal and Capricorn as a cardinal. So sometimes they can be the same, but sometimes they can be different. So that's one thing, but they're still technically working together because they're also the same element, right? Even if the modalities are different, they're still the same element. The difference with inconjuncts is that they're both different element and different modality. So they literally are, they might as well speak English and Chinese and try to understand each other, going to a different land they've neither of them have ever been to. So it's very complicated, but much like an opposition, inconjunctions also allow the ability to learn from others, right? Because there's no stress here. That's the difference between this and an opposition. Even though an opposition has these similar qualities, oppositions are very stressful aspects, and it can get rather high tensions, if you will, because they want to go in polar opposite directions. Whereas with inconjuncts, they just don't understand each other. They absolutely do not understand each other. And so, because they don't necessarily want to go in different ways about things, they just want to understand why the other sign wants to do things in the way that they're doing it. And so, it is one of the reasons why I call inconjuncts the path of knowledge. It's learning from another person. It's learning about another culture. It's learning about how to do things in a different manner. So that's why inconjuncts are a little bit unique. By the way, neither of the conjuncts or inconjuncts are neither harmonious nor challenging, right? So they're not effortlessly, and they're not stressful. In fact, quite the opposite, right? As we just talked about, a conjunct are literally blended and act as one, and an inconjunct is really just curious about the other one and wants to know about them. So there's not necessarily any stress involved. There's just quite a almost curiosity. So these are the 6 most basic aspects that I want you guys to really try to be familiar with as we move forward and talk about things in our videos. Or if you ever want to read your own natal chart, please use this knowledge to learn how to read your own natal charts, right? So harmonious aspects, also known as very beneficial aspects, trines and sextiles. Almost unconscious passive buffs versus your active buffs that you must work towards. Your challenging aspects are your squares. They create a large amount of tension, but not necessarily stress. And the tension is required in order for you to take action. It's basically one of those situations of, if I don't go out there and stop them, they're going to get themselves killed type of situation. There is tension, but there's not stress, right? And oppositions are basically two points in two opposite signs which want to do things in completely different ways and are trying to figure out how to come to a happy little medium in which the two can agree. And last but not least, our conjuncts and inconjuncts here talk about either blended to the point that they act as one because they're working together, or just curious about each other, even if they don't, speak the same language. They're completely different cultures and they're in a land none of them recognize. So it's definitely about this whole curiosity and learning. Definitely learning. And then the last thing I want to cover in this video is retrograding. Retrograding is a concept that we talk about quite frequently, both in natal charts and in transits. And right now we're in the middle of a Mercury retrograde, which is probably the worst time to be giving you feedback in videos such as these, but we're gonna roll with it, right? So planets and points can go in two directions. They can either go direct or they can retrograde. And retrograde essentially means moving backwards, or the perception that things are moving backwards. So let's go over it. The sun, the moon, and the planets and asteroids all move direct. However, during certain times, planets and asteroids appear to be going the opposite direction. Remember, in actual planets up there, planets don't just stop, coming to a roaring stop and then go the opposite direction. It doesn't work like that. However, from the perspective of the Earth, they appear to be going the opposite direction. This is what is known as retrograding. Points begin to retrograde after a brief moment of being stationary. When a planet is stationary, their energies are felt up to 5 times stronger than usual. So sometimes we may talk about, oh, look, Neptune is going stationary direct, or, oh, crap, look at that. Ceres is about to go stationary retrograde. And generally what that means is it's going to become stationary and then it's going to go either direct or retrograde, right? So why is retrograding so important, and why do we talk about it so much? During retrograding, you experience the energies of the planet in a more subjective internal way. Thus, your experience and expression of the planet's energy is very unique to you. There is a link to the past or a concern with the past. Some karmic astrologers believe that retrograding planets indicate a link to your past life. And let me tell you that during the last 6 months that we experienced Neptune retrograding, at least in my own, how do I say this? In my own home, we definitely had a lot of experiences to past life, in which we became more aware of what actually occurred in our previous lives and how things completely fell out. And there was a lot of grief, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering that needed healing and that needed to be addressed, because both we had Neptune and Chiron retrograding in Pisces. So a lot of these energies were felt inward, inside, regarding both our current past and our past lives. Now, something to take away from this is that, note, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant do not retrograde. They are always going forward. And you'll also want to know that the North Node and the South Node are always retrograding. So a lot of people might say, oh wow, retrograding, that's awesome. I have my nodes retrograding on my chart. Yeah, most people do actually. In fact, the only time the nodes don't retrograde is when they make a certain aspect with the moon. Because think the nodes are the nodes of the moon. Kind of think of them like low tides and high tides in a way. The moon kind of affects the way the nodes work. But it's not very often it occurs. I mean, they happen throughout every cycle, but they don't happen for more than a couple hours, I would say. So they're not something that we typically notice when nodes are not retrograding, because they generally are retrograding all the time. So as long as you guys keep this in fact, right? Sun, Moon, Ascendant do not retrograde, and North and South nodes are always retrograding. So yeah, you know, if you talk to several karmic astrologers, if you have a lot of retrograding planets in your sign, generally it can indicate that there's a lot of things that you need to be working to in this life that relates to your past life. So that's one way of looking at things. Another thing that you can look at is how are the transits happening and how are they affecting you. What houses are they in? What signs are they in? Over what of your points are they on? And it could also indicate a lot of moments of healing or moments of pain during these cycles. And generally when something is retrograding, it's going to remind you of that really negative, nasty feeling, because it wants you to become aware of it. And once you're aware of it, once you open up and realize that this is something that you need to be addressing, you then open the key to be able to address it. That's important, because no one can heal you without your consent. No one can help you if you don't want to be helped. And so during retrograding, we expose a lot of that pain and suffering so that we can open it up to healing. So that's really all that we have for this video. You know, in the upcoming days, we're going to be putting out part 3, which is actually already done. I just need to record the video for it, and then I will be working on drawing up part 4, which is going to be talking about the 12 houses. If you guys don't know what houses are, you know, you have those little numbers on each one of these like divisions, right? These are the house numbers, and these all have really special meanings that can just go in completely different ways. So for next time, we're just going to go over the basics. We're going to be talking about the 12 signs, and then we're going to be talking about the 12 houses afterwards. And then after that, we're going to go into some intermediate stuff, right? We're going to be talking about the more powerful aspects, such as, you know, yods, grand squares, grand trines, tricolors, fez. Those are going to be all really big ones, definitely more intermediate level stuff. And then afterwards, if I'm not forgetting anything, we're going to start making videos that are going to be based off of planets in different signs, planets in different houses. And that's where things are going to get more complex. So remember last time, what did we have? A combination of 1,720 something different combinations for customization for a human being. Now we just threw in a bunch of aspects that can either empower or challenge, or maybe an area of learning for a person. And then on top of that, we have the signs and houses to still go over. So it's quite a lot, you know. Once again, I just always love to say, you're more than just your sun sign, honey. There is a lot that goes into creating a human being. But hopefully you guys found this video useful. Hopefully we've gone over all of the most basic aspects so that you guys can follow along with our weekly astrological horoscopes and know what the collective consciousness is all talking about and stuff. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please leave them in the description below. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys appreciate it, or found this useful, and you know, appreciate this. And yeah, you know, very much would, you know, appreciate a thumbs up if you like it. Leave a comment, pass the good vibes, and I'll pass them back. And if you found this useful, you know, maybe spread it to some other people that may not be aware of some of this stuff. Maybe we can get them into astrology as well, and we can be all little astro nerds. But yeah, no, with that said, you guys take care. Thanks for watching. Much appreciated. Stay safe, stay positive, and I will catch you guys on the next Basics of Astrology. Peace.